Okay, I think we are there. So, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may happen to be in this strange and occasionally wonderful world of ours. I'm Tad Williams. I am sitting at my desk in our home in California. It is now 7:01 Pacific Daylight Time, and I thank you for joining me. Who's here already? Let's see. Jared. Hello, Jared. Hello, Jerry. Angie, Barb Ann, Mike, and Emily. Hello, everybody. Oh, good, Emily. I'm glad you went to the message board. Yeah, they are really nice folks. They really are. I can't take personal credit for that, but they are. So, wanted to say hello and welcome you all aboard. Hi, Kelly. And wanted to mention, in case you haven't seen my email yet, not my email, my post, whatever, that my current thought is that I am going to move my readings back one day next week. That is, since it is Halloween, I will be doing my readings at 2 a.m. early Saturday Halloween morning for the overseas folk and the hopelessly sleepless or whatever, who are in my general time zones. And then I will also do this reading, the 7 p.m. reading will be actually at 7 p.m. Saturday. So both readings will take place on Halloween. One early in the morning, 2 a.m. my time, and one at 7 p.m. Halloween evening. And who knows? I'll let you know during the week as I figure it out, as I see if there's anything that I have to do here. We are not much. We have very little we have to do with trick-or-treaters here because of where we are. We're in the hills. It's a long, windy road to get to us. The houses are far apart. Wild beasts roam the tangled woods. So we don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters. In fact, I don't think we've ever had a trick-or-treater since we've been living here, which is actually pretty sad. But to give you an example, when our kids were still young, we would go trick-or-treat at other people's houses, either over near the kids' schools, or we would go to our dear friend Dina and Scott's place in Mountain View and go trick-or-treating there with them, because our neighborhood just is not conducive to it. So I don't think anybody's going to be much trick-or-treating at all. I mean, there'll be very little of it compared to usual. And what there will be will not make it to my street. So I think what we'll do is do a Halloween party of sorts. I will try to find something scary to read because I think I'm going to finish The Heart of What Was Lost tonight. And who knows? I'll see what else I can come up with that might be interesting or entertaining. So that's the plan. And that is where I'm at. So I will post things on social media of various kinds and of varying degrees of sociability as to what I'm going to do, but that is the plan right now, which is to move everything back 24 hours and do Halloween readings next week. So, however, this is not Halloween. This is 6 days before Halloween, so I'm going to do my regular meeting and reading tonight, and what we're probably going to do is finish off The Heart of What Was Lost, which I had a bit of a clumsy transition with at 2 o'clock in the morning because I realized I was either going to have to read 15 minutes past the hour or more, which gets to be very late for me, and or else I was going to have to cut it off a bit early. So I cut it off a bit early, babbled for a few minutes to fill the time, and so I'm going to actually go back a tiny bit in the reading tonight to try to make it all come out even, just so everybody's happy and the obsessive compulsive in me is satisfied as well, because I didn't want to have to go really long last night and then not have anything to read tonight. So we are finishing up The Heart of What Was Lost, and that's what I'm going to be reading. And those of you who have been following the story but maybe have not been able to find every single chance to watch or possible and whatever, just to kind of keep you up to date on where we are going into tonight's reading. The mountain has collapsed in the midst of a parley between the forces of the mortals and the Hikedaya, or Norns, of Nakiga. And the huge front of the mountain came down. covered the gate, killed a whole bunch of people, including General Sunoku, who was the female general much beloved by the people, who was out as part of the parley. And at the end of that, we ended a section, and then we started the new section and found that Vieki, who had also been at the parley, had survived, as had many other folk. And even though they by no means won the war, the fact that the Norns had been saved from the siege by this collapse of the mountainside over the front gates of the mountain city meant that things were in some ways back to normal. Also, during the course of his work, Vieki had broken through into an underground cavern and found there a lake full of, as it mentioned in the story, blind fish and moss and other things. And so the starving people of Nakiga, the starving Norn citizens, had a new influx of food. So Vieki himself is now very celebrated, and everybody is very happy with him. But he himself is not so happy because something is troubling him. And that's what we've been finding out in the last section, including him going around and asking questions about the rock fall and what happened inside the mountain immediately before that happened. So anyway, so I'm going to start without my glasses because it'll be easier that way. I am going to start with this section of The Heart of What Was Lost, which is actually the summing up by the chronicler, the Norn chronicler, who has been offering commentary from after the fact all along. We come now to the end of this particular tale of the Wars of Return, and to a necessary apology from your chronicler. Because these words were written less than half a great year after the events described, and because your scribe lived through the siege of the city and felt the mountain fall, it has been more difficult than usual to keep this chronicler's flawed perceptions from affecting the proper recounting of fact. The only true history is that which has survived for generations and provided edification to our people. History that gives us an understanding of the past, which holds firmly to the eternal truths of who we are, the undeniable truths of our martyrs, our sacred home, and our beloved monarch. But since Queen Utuku slept the Ketayindra throughout the siege, and even as of this writing has still not returned to us from her healing exile on the road of dreams, this telling of our history can only be flawed and incomplete, full of the errors that come when one humble chronicler tries to tell the tale without the necessary perspective of time and the corrections of her superiors. Still, it was this scribe's duty to do so, and she performed it as best she could. A great tragedy in the South was nearly followed by an even greater tragedy, the loss of our longtime home and the destruction of our people. But by the virtue of the nobles of our most important orders, the sacrifices, the singers, and the builders, we survived. A lesson is here for all. Do not trust in what seems to be the truths of the moment. Put your faith instead in the things that are eternal. Love our queen and love our mountain. Love and remember the garden that was lost, and the song of our race will find its proper melody. Here this telling ends. The humble chronicler begs pardon for her failings and hopes that her efforts have brought at least something of use to those who read this. Signed, Lady Miga Sate Janata, Order of Chroniclers, in the eighth great year of High Celebrant Zunayabe, 16th Magister of that order. Vieki's builders were digging out a blocked main tunnel to the outside. As he returned from an inspection of the workers' progress, making his way down a narrow, nameless alley on the main tier of Nakiga, he suddenly felt the hairs on his neck rise. It took a moment longer before he heard the muffled sound of soft boots. Instead of waiting to discover whether any of those coming behind him even approached his own rank, Vieki heeded the warning of his lifted hackles and stepped to the side to allow those behind him to pass. It was a line of singers in robes the color of dried blood, a dozen or more, and the four at the back were carrying a litter. As the procession went by, some silent signal was passed. The litter stopped, and its curtains parted. Viecki could see nothing of the face in the deep-shadowed hood that appeared there, but he knew that unmusical voice the instant he heard it. "Hold there! I see a face I believe I know. Is that Viecki Seenduya of the Builders?" Surprised, and perhaps even a bit frightened at the unexpected recognition, Viecki made all the proper gestures of respect as he bowed low. "It is, great Lord Akinabi, and it is flattering that you remember me. I only heard of your recovery a few bells ago, but I have already lit several candles in the temples in gratitude for your return to us. I'm sure all of Nakiga feels the same." Despite his fear of the powerful Lord of Song, Viecki was not exaggerating. The people of Nakiga might all tremble before the magician, but Akinabi had been a familiar part of all their lives since before any but the queen and a few of her eldest counselors could remember. The news of his reawakening had been greeted by most as a reassuring return to the way things had been. As befitted one of his stature, the great singer gave no sign he had heard the flattering words. "I have been told that Lord Yarike has named you his successor, host foreman. I hope that when you ascend to Yarike's title, you will be as cooperative with the important work of our order as your master has been." Without another word or any sort of sign, Akinabi's litter rose back onto the shoulders of his carriers. The hooded procession abruptly moved off down the street, vanishing into the darkness and leaving Viecki to ponder all the meanings that could lurk in the Lord of Song's words. Cooperative. He hopes I will be as cooperative as Lord Yarike. That innocuous phrase, which ordinarily would have seemed only a bit of obvious politicking, seemed in present circumstances something more sinister. Of course, our orders worked together during the siege for the good of all Nakiga. But does Akinabi mean some other cooperation with the Order of Song? Something darker and more secret? After a long day spent breathing stone dust in the sweltering depths of the mountain, Viecki wanted nothing more than to return to his house, to order and quiet. But Akinabi's cryptic words gnawed at him, and he knew rest would be as elusive as it had been for many nights now. The only thing that might quiet his mind was finding answers to the questions that tormented him, though he knew hearing them might destroy his world. But even if he could not put off the confrontation any longer, he still had to return to his house first. He had something there that he needed. "Southerner! Porto! Over here!" It was Kolbjorn waving from the other side of a group of men hitching oxen to carts. "Hoy! Over here!" the Northman called. Porto went to join him, stepping over the quantities of dung that decorated the muddy road. The wind had a freezing bite to it today, and the drovers and others were struggling to work while keeping their backs to the icy breeze. "I've been looking all over for you," the young riversman said. "One of the Duke's men is waiting for us back at the campfire." Porto pulled his cloak tighter. "Why? By the good God, they're not going to keep us here any longer, are they? I have 500 leagues to ride home. I will be fortunate if I am back before the Elysiomancer festival." "You will be fortunate indeed if snakes don't eat you," said Kolbjorn. "I hear the southern lands are fierce with snakes." Porto rolled his eyes. The Rimmersmen all seemed to think he had spent his life in a steaming jungle like the swampy Ran, instead of a perfectly civilized city. "Oh, yes, the snakes are common as kittens where I come from. They crawl into your bed at night to stay warm and then lick your nose to wake you when they're hungry." Kolbjorn stared at him for a moment, sensing the other might be having fun at his expense. "Well, I'd rather fight giants every day than have those devil's creatures under my feet all the time." Porto laughed. "You are a braver man than I, Kolbjorn, but we already knew that. What does the Duke's man want? Ask him. There he stands." The yellow-bearded Rimmersman was the only figure beside the fire, the one they called Sludig Two Axes, one of his Grimner's fiercest fighters. At the moment he looked distracted, but otherwise approachable. "You were looking for me, my lord?" Sludig lifted his head. "Ah, yes, Pt.12, am I right? And don't call me my lord. You're a knight and I'm not." He showed his teeth in a hard grin. "Yes, I've been looking for you. The Duke sent this." He lifted his broad hand. It held a purse. When he was sure it was really meant for him, Porto reached out. "What is it?" He loosened the string and looked inside. "Sweet mother of the Adon, this is for me? 3 gold imperators? And look at all this silver." Kolbjorn was smirking. "I already got mine. Counted it, too. 5 golds worth altogether." "But why?" "Because it is traditional when a man has been knighted that he be given land or wealth," Sludig said, grinning. "Duke Grimner asked me to tell you he is short of land these days, until all the new kings and queens' business is dealt with, but he can at least give you something to make your homeward trip a little easier. Do you accept it?" "Accept it? My wife would skin me if I didn't. Please thank the Duke. He is very generous." "More than generous," said Kolbjorn. "Was there one for Erling as well, the man who led us?" "He has it already," said Sludig. "Barely seemed to notice, I have to say. Busy polishing that giant skull." Porto shook his head. "Erling has not been entirely right since the day the mountain fell." Sludig nodded. "In truth, none of us have been. Now I must be going. There is much to do before we break camp tomorrow and start back. Before your road parts from ours, Southerner, you and this young Vestaman here should come and take a cup with me." "Seems a nice enough fellow," Kolbjorn said when Sludig was gone. "He strangled one of the white foxes with his bare hands. Did you know that?" Porto shrugged. "We have all done strange things here at the ends of the earth." The magister's chamber on the highest floor of the order house was chilly, as Yarike always kept it, with a small oil lamp on his table providing the only light and heat. They had been working together for hours, bringing the master lists up to date on the order's many current tasks, but Vieki was so full of disquiet he had spoken very little. You seem remote, Vieki-tsa," Yarike finally said. "You have scarcely attended to a word I have said, forcing me to repeat myself many times. That is not like you. You were always my most eager student." Vieki took a breath, then another. "That is because something is troubling me, High Magister." Yarike's sharp eyes watched him closely. "Speak, then. I hope it is not the thing we spoke of before. You deserve all that has come to you from finding the hidden link. It does not harm your fitting modesty. That is not what troubles me now. May I share my thoughts, Master?" "I think you should." Now that the time had come, he found it hard to speak. The basalt walls of the order house pressed in on him, their great age a silent reproof. How dare he stand beneath that arched ceiling, which had seen hundreds of foremen like Vieki come and go, and harbor such thoughts about a high magister, let alone one who had been so generous to him. He felt he stood on sliding ground, being carried toward a precipice. Better to jump than to fall. "I have been thinking about how you showed me the heart of what was lost when you thought you might not survive to return to Nakiga, and wished to make certain it would reach your family. That was a great honor for me, High Magister. I have trusted few who are not my blood as I trust you, Vieki-tsa. But then you gave your sacred family treasure to be buried with General Sunoku. to honor her, putting the happiness of the people above your own desires. Yaarike looked at him evenly, but his tone had a question in it. Yes, that is always a magister's duty. I do my best to understand all your lessons, master. Because of that, I have been thinking, and I have decided that I need to show you something of my own family heritage. May I? Of course. Vieki withdrew the bundle of cloth from his robe and placed it on the table in front of his master. Then he carefully unwrapped it until the gray thing lay revealed. For long moments, Yaarike only looked down at the witchwood dagger, at its long, thin blade and its pommel in the shape of a flower, the petals made of milky crystal. Oops, right there. It is a beautiful thing, the magister said at last. How old? Nothing like the heart of what was lost, said Vieki. This snow rose dagger did not come from the lost garden, but was made here in this land, in our old city of Kementari before it fell. It was given to my foreparent Enduyo in the era of the fifth celebrant, as a token of gratitude from the queen. In some ways, it is the foundation of our clan. Your foreparent was greatly honored indeed if this gift came from the queen's own hand. May I hold it? Now Yaarike glanced up to meet Vieki's gaze, his questioning look almost aggressive. Vieki spread his hands. Of course, master. Still cradling it in its wrappings. Sorry, I'm just adjusting the screen there. Still cradling it in its wrappings, the magister tilted the slender blade to study it more carefully in the unsteady lamplight. Dark, thought Vieki. It is always so dark inside the mountain and inside the hearts of the Hikedaya. For a moment, with the end of all things familiar pressing on his mind and speeding his heart, he again felt himself to be a creature that lived life in secret, some sightless, burrowing thing of the dark depths. If the race of Hikedaya all died here beneath the mountain, the world outside might never know. Nor care if they did know, except to breathe a sigh of relief, Vieki decided. And in that instant, nothing seemed to matter at all. Not his honor, not his painful, complicated feelings about his master, not his marriage, nor his clan, nor any of the things that he had thought important. Suddenly he felt too weak to stand. Without asking permission, he let himself sag into the chair opposite his master's seat. Yaarike glanced up briefly from the snow rose dagger, but said nothing. After a moment's more inspection, the magister held out the knife. Vieki took it back. I seem to remember some controversy surrounding Enduyo, said Yaarike, but I never knew the details. Forgive me, master, but I do not believe you. Vieki found himself growing bolder, as though he had let go of something that had previously kept him tethered to the known, the comfortable. No, I cannot believe one of your wisdom would have offered someone like me the chance to succeed you unless you knew every detail of my ancestry, back to the 8 ships, if not all the way back to the garden itself. And the controversy, as you call it, happened during your lifetime, when you were already a young foreman in this order. Surely you remember. After all, it ended my ancestor's life. Yaarike actually smiled, a wintry twitch of his thin lips. Ah, but I am old and have much to recall. Sorry, I lost it there. But I am old and I have much to recall. Perhaps you could remind me, Vieki-za. My ancestor, Enduyo of Kementari, was an official of the palace, a master cleric. He was ordered by the queen's oath-bound to confirm the treachery of 2 Maze Palace clerics with whom he often worked. He had no personal proof of their guilt, but the palace believed them guilty, so he was ordered to testify against them. To refuse would have meant the disgrace and destruction of his entire family. Given no honorable choice, he elected instead to use this dagger and end himself, like so. Viecki pulled his robe aside and let the knife slide forward a little until the tip of the narrow gray blade rested against his chest. Even the clerics he had been ordered to incriminate attended his funeral out of respect. Of course, they were still found guilty, still went to the executioner. He looked up at his master. So you see, this blade is schooled at solving difficult problems. And is there a reason you brought it here to show me? The magister asked. I certainly hope you are not planning to use it to take a life today, yours or anyone else's. Yarike poured himself a cup from the ewer on the table, then without asking filled another cup for Viecki and pushed it toward him. Here, this cloudberry wine is a very old vintage. It is said there is a trace of KME in every barrel. Viecki had never tasted the witchwood extract and knew he might never have another chance. He took the cup and drank deep. The wine was tart, almost too sour, with a taste that lingered on his tongue for long moments, as arresting as a memory both strong and bittersweet. Thank you, my lord. But he would not let himself be distracted. So, you see, I find myself in a dilemma today, High Magister. Only you, of all others, can help me to resolve it. And this dilemma is two choices. One is to denounce someone who has been my teacher and guide much of my life, one whom I have loved like a grandfather. A truly dreadful possibility. And your alternative? To remain silent about a terrible crime. Not just the murder of a beloved hero, but an attack on truth and history itself. So it seems I am trapped between betraying my mentor or my queen. He touched the dagger lying in his lap. You can see that following my ancestors' course seems the only honorable alternative to those two unthinkable acts. His master drank deeply, then carefully wiped his upper lip with the back of his hand. I think you had better tell me what has led you to this perilous situation, High Foreman. The death of General Sunoku, Magister, and the collapse of the mountainside. I have come to believe that neither were accidents. Yarike's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but he only signaled for Viecki to continue. He marveled at the calm in his own voice as he described the row of diggings he had found above the gate inside the mountain, all of them listed in the order's records as abandoned projects, all of them exactly the same. And what do you guess the purpose of these diggings, as you call them, to have been? Yarike asked. To make the mountain fall. And how would that be accomplished? And kept secret, no less. Yarike sounded as if he was challenging a bright pupil to think harder, not arguing against a foolish impossibility. Now that he was committed to speaking what he had so long kept secret and silent, Viecki felt as though his gut had been tied into a cruel knot. The hard part would be the secrecy, because it would not be a simple or swift task. After all, it took nearly 200 of our builders working for days to bring down a much smaller weight of stone at Three Ravens Tower. True enough, but who could undertake such a complicated and dangerous task here in Nakiga without anyone knowing? And why hide it? The collapse of the mountainside saved our city and our people, after all. Every word from his master's mouth pulled at the ends of the knot inside him, tightening it. The deed was hidden because defense of our mountain was not its only purpose, I would guess. As to the other question, the person or persons responsible would need both knowledge of such things and the power to make it happen and keep it secret from the people of Nakiga. Yarike nodded slowly. That makes sense, at least. Please continue, host Foreman. Tell me the rest of how this astounding trick could be accomplished from inside the mountain. The set of tunnels in each digging would have been excavated by workmen who would not know what they were doing. Tunnels leading down to a place where the rock of the mountain's face was weakest. Then the workers would be sent away and the diggings declared useless. But each of those places also had a source of water close at hand. Could not someone repeatedly fill those new tunnels with water, which would then run down and into the cracks behind that weak spot in the mountain's face? Even the youngest scholar in our order knows that once such water reached the end of its journey, it would freeze because of the chill of the outside air. When the ice expanded, pushing the rock outward around it, more water could be poured in, beginning the process again. Eventually, enough of such careful, secret work could weaken the entire rock face until it split loose from the mountain's surface and fell, destroying our enemies below and sealing the gates off from invaders for a long time. And only the most skillful of builders could even hope to make such a thing happen at the proper time. Even so, it must have been very difficult. I hear many interesting things in what you say, Viekitsa, but not much in the way of proof. And although it caused the tragedy of Tsunoko's death, the collapse also saved our city, perhaps our entire race. It would be a hard thing to accuse an official of high family of such a strange and useful crime. I know, Master. That is one of the many reasons I brought this. He patted the blade in his lap. Because with it I can solve that problem without bringing the official's family or my own into disrepute. Solve what problem, exactly? The problem of not being able to let it go. I need to know, High Magister. I need to know what happened and the truth about someone I admired beyond any other. His master looked from the knife in Viecki's hands to his own hands, graceful and strong, roughened by the handling of innumerable stones. Let me then hasten you toward your solution. Abruptly, Yarike pulled open his heavy robes, exposing the thin tunic he wore beneath. You are right in your suspicions, Viekitsa, all of them. It was my idea to bring the mountain down. And I also caused Tsunoko's death, although that was not as I wished it. Now strike, then fold my hands around the blade so it will seem I pierced my own heart. Otherwise my clan will hound you, and you should not take the punishment for my mistakes. Viecki shook his head. No, this blade is not for you, Master. It is for me to end my own life. I cannot live in a world where one who means so much to me, who has shaped my being more than my own parents, could do such a thing. His hand closed around the hilt, and he lifted the needle-sharp dagger to his breast. Just tell me why first, Master. Why did you kill the general? She seemed brave and honorable to me. Why did you hate her so? Yarike seemed surprised. I did not hate her. I said what I believed at her tomb. She was the best of us. But you killed her. The Lord of Builders sighed. Not by choice. I, for one, hoped she would escape to the Northmen's side of the rockfall, but the collapse took longer to begin than we had guessed. Why do you suppose I tried to take on the role of legate myself? The role you infuriatingly stole back from me. I did not want to see you killed or made a prisoner of the mortals. If things went awry, I wanted you to replace me as leader of this order. But Viecki was fixed on one word. What do you mean, we, Magister? Did you take Naji into your confidence when you would not trust me? Yarike shook his head. Oh, Vieki, how can you be so clever and yet such a fool? Host Foreman Naji is of no importance. He knew nothing of any of this. I gave him the task of supervising the gate only because I wanted no blame to adhere to you if my plan went awry. But you said we, Master. Who else planned this with you? You spoke of the need for secrecy. That is what Lord Akanabi brought to the conspiracy. Who better to undertake a task like that, to undermine the mountain under the very nose of 100 builders, than his singers? They can walk the between spaces when they must. They can be all but invisible. But Akanabi was asleep. The idea that his master had planned this with the Lord of Song was the most disturbing thing he had heard. So it was told to all Nakiga. It made his work, our work, easier. But he was not the only one who took part in the plan. Again, why do you think I pushed you away, made it clear that you were not privy to my inmost counsels? Because that inner circle was myself, Akanabi, and Marshal Muyare. The Marshal? Sunoku's own relative conspired against her? Vieki let the hand holding the blade fall back into his lap. He had thought himself a cynic, but now was revealed as childishly naive. Her own clansmen wished our greatest general dead? If our people could also be saved, yes, Yarike said. Few reach the highest circles in Nakiga if they are crippled by too much sentiment, and Muyare knew it was only a matter of time until she supplanted him. But Muyare's price for joining the conspiracy was that Akanabi and I had to agree to support Sunoku's plan to rebuild our people through interbreeding with slaves. Muyare saw the wisdom in growing a new army, so there will be half-mortals in the houses of our nobles one day soon, half-mortals in the orders themselves. So you all joined together to murder her? I did not want to, but it was Akanabi's price, and if he was willing to gamble with the survival of our people, I was not. As I said, I hoped Sunoku would only be exiled, that she would become a prisoner of the mortals, along with those who accompanied her. I did not lie when I said she was the best of us. It grieves me still that she was the last casualty of the war against the Northmen. This is serpent talk, truth and lies mixed. Vieki felt something like a storm boiling inside him now. How simple it would be to end all the confusion, all the disillusionment, with one swift thrust of the knife into his own breast. Do you tell me you and all the others admired your victim? I cannot speak for Miyare. As for Akanabi, no. He saw only a rival for power, one who could best his reign of fear with something more genuine, the belief of the people. And yet you helped him kill her. As I said, I admired her, but I also saw her for what she would become, the end of our race. I did not want her dead, but I did want her gone from Nakiga. The tip of the blade had actually pierced the cloth and pricked the skin of his chest. Vieki could feel the pain like a tiny star burning a mere hand's breadth from his heart. But as much as he wanted an end to the agony of his thoughts, he wanted answers more. I do not understand you, Yarike. Sunoku was the heart of what was lost, but made flesh. One who believed the old truths with all her spirit and could make them real to others by the force of her own beliefs. But the old truths, I fear, are no longer true, Vieki-san. That is why the next generation will require different minds, different truths.
General Sunoku, in the burning purity of her heart, would never have given up the struggle against the mortals. She would have waited only until we had bred enough new soldiers to be fit for war again, then led our people into first one disastrous fight against the swarming mortals, then another, again and again, until nothing of our people and our original bloodline was left. Yarike reached out his hand and gently touched Vieki's where it held the dagger. Do you not understand? I have chosen you because you always look at and consider what the others do not, my young pupil. I said once that you could see around corners. Look ahead now. Let your heart tell you if I am wrong or not. Let your heart tell you if what I did was wrong for our people. If your answer is different than mine, then I was wrong about you, wrong about everything, and you must denounce me. Vieki closed his eyes. How could the deepest wishes of his people be wrong? How could Sunoku, that bright, brave flame, have been a danger? One might as easily say that the queen herself had betrayed them. You are far wiser than I am, master, but you cannot change me with words. I have already made my peace with death before I came here today, he said. Like our sacrifices, I am dead already. A sudden movement. The magister, moving more quickly than Vieki could have supposed, knocked the witchwood knife from his hand and sent it clattering to the floor. By the garden and all who escaped it, we do not need more sacrifices. Yarike put a hand on him again, his grip surprisingly strong for his great age, holding Vieki in the chair when he would have scrambled after the fallen blade. Listen, we have always had sacrifices, and they have always done their duty without question. But in the days and years ahead, we need something different. We need builders. Yarike straightened up, then bent and retrieved the knife, placing it on the table before Vieki with a deliberateness that was almost like ritual. Here, it is yours. But do not hasten to end yourself. Think first, and think carefully. Sunoku, and Akinabe, and Marshal Muyare, all of them are what we have always been. Even I am too old to change, although I can see the consequences. No, if you choose to live, it will be left to you and those still to come to find a new way, so that our people can survive in this world and still honor the garden and those who have gone before. Vieki could only stare at the knife. His master's voice seemed to come from a long way away. I am leaving now, Yarike said, back to my house and my servants and my family, to return here tomorrow and continue with rebuilding our Nakiga. If you choose to live, you may also choose to denounce me. So be it. My crime is greater than any punishment the palace could devise, so whatever happens, be assured I am already my own torturer. The loss of a family jewel, however precious, is nothing to that. As for you, Vieki-san, what you will become is still an unanswered question. And then, surprisingly, Yarike bowed with the deep courtesy given from one of high standing to an equal, before turning and walking toward the door. Vieki sat in the chair, staring at the knife. Enough time passed that it became clear no guards had been summoned, that his master had done just as he had said he would. But Vieki, his thoughts now weary, dull, and bruised like over-disciplined slaves, did not know what to do next. He had come to the order house prepared to die. But what if he did not? How could he live each day from now on, knowing that all he had thought simple and true was instead as tangled and foul as the roots of a rotting tree? The lamp burned down, until only a flicker lit the room, and still he sat. When he walked through the front door, his wife and the servants were waiting. When Kimabu saw him, she made a gesture of respect that had both fright and anger in it. "Husband, I feared something had happened to you." "Nothing has happened to me." He walked past her and placed the wrapped snow rose dagger back in its box upon the fireplace mantel. "Nothing is different. Nothing will change." But as he said it, he knew it was not true. Whatever might follow from this moment, everything had changed. "I thought you might have been hurt or even killed in some accident," she said, but her tone suggested that she was almost disappointed that nothing had happened to be worth so much worrying. He shook his head. He had left the house empty, a man who had thought himself already dead. Now he was something else, a man who, as his master said, could see around corners, a man who could think about the days still to come. "Do not make a few hours of absence sound so dreadful, my wife," he said, and stood patiently while the servants hurried to remove his robes. "What terrible things could happen to me? I will get up tomorrow, like all days, and go to work for my master and my people. After all, I am no sacrifice, am I? No, I am a builder." Erling, busy as always with his grisly task, scarcely looked up when Porto asked permission to leave the camp and bid Endry goodbye. Porto could scarcely remember the last time Erling had put down the giant's head. He had removed its flesh and cleaned the skull with rock dust and snow until it almost gleamed even in the dull northern light. It seemed a strange way to honor fallen comrades, but since he had been in the north, Porto had seen the same look Erling wore on many other faces and had learned not to ask. If he had possessed a mirror, he suspected he would have seen it on his own face as well. "We won't have time in the morning," Erling said. "Go and do what you must now." And then he looked up, and there was something else on his face this time beside mere emptiness. "We have to remember. We all have to remember. So go and do your remembering." Porto nodded. Erling looked from Porto down to the grinning fanged skull. "I need to remember too." He held up the skull with both hands, tilted it, then lowered it to his lap again and began scraping with his knife at a remaining lump of dried flesh where the neck had joined the head. "I'm going to take it home," he said. "I'm going to put it by the fireplace. That way I'll remember." "I'll remember the men too, Thane," Porto said after a moment of silence. "Old Draghi and the rest, they died bravely. You can tell their families that." Erling shook his head. No, I'm going to take this home so that when I wake up in the night, sweating cold and my heart beating too fast, remembering that creature staring down at me, I'll look at this instead and I'll remember that it's dead. Dead." He nodded as though he had proved a point and went back to his scraping. As Porto walked out of the camp and back into the mountain's long shadow, he could not help wondering that everything in the valley now looked so ordinary, so harmless. But for the immense tailing of boulders and broken stones that seemed to have been dumped against the mountain's base, there was no sign of anything had happened here for centuries. The gate was buried, the monsters inside now invisible. The trees dripped with melting snow. Even the sounds of his comrades readying for departure seemed to fade away. He made his way through the abandoned grove, past trees so tall he thought they must have grown before men came to Ostenard. It was even more quiet here, like an empty church. He hoped the winter would remain at bay until he had at least made his way out of cold Rimmersgard. Porto had a fierce longing for the true southern sun, for the sound of the ocean and the smell of the harbor. He might have been knighted by the start that again. He might have been knighted by the Duke of Elvitsala, but he had never felt so perdu at ease as he did now, surrounded by Northmen and the great cold mountains. He could not imagine that once home he would ever leave Ansis Pelopé again. Not to fight, that was certain. Not to see friends and comrades die. Porto saw from the edge of the clearing that something was wrong with Endry's grave. As he neared it, he made out that it had been torn open, and his heart dropped. The stone cairn he had built had clearly not been enough to keep the scavengers away. Then another thought crept into his mind, and his innards went icy cold. He stood at the edge of the pit and looked at the way the stones had been pushed outward around the mound, and the way the earth itself had fallen in. He had prayed Endry's grave had been beyond the Norn's terrible spells, but the marks in the earth of hands digging upward like the claws of a mole told him otherwise. The hole had been emptied, but not from outside. The chances were good that if he had risen, Endry had been burned with the others. Porto was turning to go when he glanced to the southern side of the clearing. In a knot of young trees, none of them much more than twice the height of a man, leaned an upright, unmoving man shape, sagging like a scarecrow in a Nabanai field. "Oh, dear God," Porto moaned softly and made the sign of the tree on his breast. "Sweet Usares, preserve us." As he drew closer to the body, he saw that the garments did indeed look like Endry's, stained with earth and blotched with melted snow. But when he was only a yard or so away, he saw what had stopped the dead man here, so far from everyone else, so far from both the living and the other spell-raised dead. Endry's red harborside scarf was tangled in low branches and had pulled tight around the corpse's throat like a hangman's noose. The young man's head hung down, hiding the face, but the skin Porto could see was mottled and black. He reached out toward the body, doing his best to ignore the terrible stench, disgust and pity fighting in his trembling hands. Endry was facing south. He had not been moving toward the Norn summons, or even toward his living fellows, Porto realized, and tears sprang into his eyes as he understood. The dead man had been trying to go home. Then Endry moved. Porto jumped back in horror, and when he made the tree this time, it was though he stabbed at his own breast. The dead fingers twitched, and the corpse tried to take a stumbling step, but it was held fast. Porto could not move either, though no scarf held him. The corpse lifted its head, revealing the full horror of weeks in the ground. Something in the ruined eyes seemed to recognize Porto because the dead hand rose as though trying to touch him. "God, in his mercy, what did they do to you?" Porto whispered. He could not stand to look at the corrupted, collapsing face a moment longer. He drew his sword and hacked as hard as he could at the thing's neck, but was unable to swing his blade cleanly among the encroaching trees. After many more clumsy swipes, the head at last parted from the neck and thumped to the ground. The body slipped from the restraining scarf and tumbled down beside it. "Now you can go home," he said as he stood over the corpse, though it was hard for him to speak. "Go in peace." Porto carried first the body and then the head back to its grave, fighting down the urge to retch at the ripe smell of death, trying to remember that this was Endry, his friend, who deserved better than he had been given. Then he went back for the scarf, untangling it carefully from the branches. At the grave, he placed the head atop the body and then carefully wrapped the scarf around Endry's neck again, the beloved scarf the boy's mother had woven to hide the raw and ragged wounds Porto's sword had made. When he had filled in the grave and had again piled the heavy stones atop it, he kneeled to pray. then said farewell to his friend for the second and last time. When he was done, Porto climbed to his feet and walked slowly back to camp. And that is the end of The Heart of What Was Lost. And I thank you for your patience. I apologize to those who were listening last night and maybe listening to this now on a recording that I didn't finish and kind of cut you off in the middle there. But as I mentioned, it was an awkward place to break. So I wanted to finish it. And look, we're pretty much on time tonight. So that's good. Anyway, so to reiterate for those who are not around for the top of this particular reading, my plan next week, which will be Halloween week, and specifically Halloween itself, my plan next week is to do my readings at the same times, but one day early. So instead of Sunday 2 a.m. in the morning, my time, and Sunday 7 p.m. in the morning, in the evening, my time, this slot that we've just had, I am going to do something 2 a.m. in the morning, Saturday morning, Halloween, and then at 7 p.m. on Saturday. Whether it will be the normal hour, whether I may add some time, whatever. Throw it open for people to have a Halloween party with me, whatever the case is. I don't know yet. I'll have to look at what's possible and what's useful and what will work and what won't, and what things I have to read that I'm legally allowed to read and things like that. So that's my plan. I hope all of you will join me. I will post messages a few times on social media during the week and on tadwilliams.com, where you can also find copies of these readings, YouTube as well. I will post things on there to confirm that that's what I'm doing. But I pretty much expect, since I have now had this idea and I rather like it, that I will do just that. That I will make Saturday the day next week, not Sunday. So anyway, with that, we are coming to the end of this evening's whatever the heck this is. It's a reading, it's a babbling, it's me sitting here staring into the camera, preparing you all for the frights of Halloween. But it's also a chance for me to hang out with you, even though I don't get to see you. I know you're out there. I read your comments as they come in. It's a great pleasure to know that I'm having a chance to interact with all of you. So many of you are new, but so many of you are also old friends that we've known each other in social media world for so many years. So it's a real treat. And as I think I've said several times, I'm not doing this for you people. I'm doing this in part for me, because it gives me something to do and to focus my week around besides my normal stuff, which is mostly writing and picking up after horrible dogs. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing. And I thank you for joining me and giving me the useful and charming illusion that that I'm doing things that actually matter to people. I love that. And please don't tell me otherwise. I don't want to know that. So anyway, so with that, I will say thank you all so very much and remind you, as always, be good to yourselves, be good to your loved ones, your family, your friends, your neighbors, and just human beings and animals and, God, even plants in general. You know, this is a fragile world we live in. Time is fleeting. We only have what we have, and as far as I know, anyway. You know, don't take my word for anything, but that's the way I plan things and play things, is that, you know, all I know for certain, I got this time on Earth, and I intend to do what I can with it and enjoy it as much as possible, and I hope do good for people while I'm doing it. So I know you all are the same way, at least I'm confident that you are, and so I urge you to keep doing that kind of thing and to stay calm, happy, and safe and help others. And with that, I will see you Saturday, Halloween. Be there or be trapezoidal, and nobody wants to be trapezoidal. All right. Thank you very much. Good night.